I internally groaned, my head down on the steering wheel as the huge muscular man whose car I just hit tapped away on my window. The week couldn't have been worse. As if getting fired from my job wasn't enough, my boyfriend decided it was the perfect time to break up with me. Let's not forget my so-called friends who conveniently vanished when I needed them the most. And now this. Why? Why did I have to be the one to leave a nasty dent at the back of his car? I sighed, staring at the crumpled bumper of the car in front of me. Just what I needed. I dreaded facing the owner, but I knew I had to. There was only so many seconds that I could ignore his tapping on my window pane. So I braced myself, but when I looked up, my breath caught in my throat. The guy was massive, easily over 6 feet, with muscles that seemed to ripple under his shirt. He had an aura of strength and confidence that made me feel like a puny teenager. But it wasn't just his size that struck me, it was his face. He was incredibly handsome, with chiseled features and deep, piercing eyes. I swallowed hard, my mind racing as I considered all the terrible possibilities. He probably wanted payment for the damage or, worse, might take a swing at me. With all the courage I could possibly muster, I rolled down the window. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out before he could say anything. "I didn't mean to hit your car. It was an accident, and I'll cover the repair costs. I promise." He tilted his head, studying me for a moment. I felt like a mouse cornered by a lion. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. A warm, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Relax, man," he said in a deep, soothing voice. "It's just a car. Accidents happen." I blinked, not expecting such a calm response. Yeah. Still, I'm really sorry. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. The car's not too bad either," he said, glancing back at the damage. "But there's one thing you can do for me." "Here it comes," I thought, bracing myself. "What's that?" "Can you give me a ride? My destination isn't far, and my car is not going anywhere right now." I was taken aback. "You just want to ride?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm new in town and still figuring things out." "Sure," I said, relieved and curious. "Hop in." He walked around and got into the passenger seat, making my already teeny car seem even smaller with his presence. He extended his hand. "I'm Carlos, by the way. Carlos Rodriguez." "James Calderon," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not overpowering. "Nice to meet you, Carlos." As I pulled back onto the road, we started chatting. I learned that Carlos had recently moved to the city for a new job. He was still settling in and hadn't made any friends yet. Despite my initial nervousness, I found myself enjoying the conversation. There was something about Carlos that made me feel at ease. "So, what about you, James?" Carlos asked, turning to look at me. I let out a bitter laugh. "Honestly, life's only been handing me lemons for quite some time." "Really? What happened?" "Well, I recently got fired from my job." I began, not sure why I was opening up to a complete stranger. "Then my boyfriend broke up with me out of nowhere. And my friends, well, let's just say they've been pretty useless lately. And now this accident." Carlos whistled softly. "That sounds rough, man." "Yeah, tell me about it," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But thanks for listening. It helps to talk about it." "Anytime," he said with a smile. I don't know what came over me, but before I knew it, I offered my phone to him. Well, you can save my number, in case you need any help. You know, new town and all." My ears suddenly heated up. Carlos gave me a genuine smile, saved my number, and handed the phone back to me. "Will do." We reached his destination, a modest apartment complex, and I pulled over. "Here we are," I said. "I hope everything goes well with your car." "Thanks, James," he said, opening the door. "And hey, things will get better. Just hang in there." I watched him walk away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It had been a terrible day, but meeting Carlos had been a silver lining. I couldn't help but smile as I drove away. A few days later, like any other unemployed person with his life savings to burn through, I was lying on my back, scrolling through different job openings when my phone buzzed. The speed with which I stood up straight, you'd believe he had video called me even though it was a normal call. "Hey James, how's it going? Need help finding a good grocery store around here. Any recommendations?" I smiled, feeling a flutter of excitement. "Sure thing," I replied. There's a great place not far from where you are. Want me to show you? That would be awesome. Thanks. We arranged to meet, and I picked him up from his apartment. On our way to the store, I somehow ended up being in charge of not only showing him the grocery store, but of shopping for his groceries too. Alright, what's first on the list? Carlos asked, grabbing a shopping cart. I pulled out my phone and looked at the notes app. Let's see. Eggs, milk, bread, the usual basics. Carlos grinned. Basics? That's boring. We need some adventure in our shopping. I laughed. Adventure, huh? Like what? Exotic fruits? He raised an eyebrow. Why not? Let's see what weird fruits we can find. We headed to the produce section, and Carlos immediately picked up a spiky green fruit. What about this? Looks like something from an alien planet. I squinted at it. That's a durian. That's a durian. Heard it smells terrible, but tastes amazing. Carlos laughed. Well, I guess we'll just have to find out. As we continued down the aisles, Carlos playfully tossed random items into the cart. How about some pickles? And chocolate sauce? We can mix them and create a new culinary masterpiece. I shook my head, chuckling. You're insane, but okay, I'm game. What else? We turned the corner, and Carlos picked up a giant bag of marshmallows. S'mores? I nodded enthusiastically. Definitely. Can't go wrong with s'mores. We joked and laughed our way through the store, occasionally bumping into each other or making silly comments about various products. As we loaded our items onto the conveyor belt, Carlos nudged me. You know, I've had more fun grocery shopping with you than I ever thought possible. I smiled back at him. Same here. You definitely know how to make mundane things exciting. He laughed. Stick with me and life will always be an adventure. For some reason, that made me blush, though I was very careful to not let him see me. As the days went by, Carlos texted me a few more times, asking for help with various things. A good coffee shop, a decent gym, and even advice on where to get a haircut. Each time I was more than happy to assist. Our interactions became more frequent, and I found myself looking forward to his messages. One evening, Carlos invited me over for dinner. I've been practicing my cooking. He said, come over and be my guinea pig. I laughed. Sure, as long as you promise not to poison me. When I arrived at his apartment, the delicious aroma of food greeted me. Carlos had cooked a feast. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a mouth-watering dessert. We ate, drank, and talked for hours. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized how much I enjoyed his company. After dinner, we sat on his balcony, watching the stars. The night was clear and beautiful, and our conversation grew deeper. Carlos opened up a little bit about his childhood. It didn't sound like a happy one, so I didn't push him further. I shared my own hopes and worries, feeling a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. I haven't felt this close to anyone in years, I admitted, staring up at the sky. Carlos turned to me, his expression soft. Me neither. We sat in comfortable silence, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. I felt a warmth in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Was it possible that I was falling for Carlos? The thought scared me, but it also excited me. A month later. It was literally past midnight when my phone buzzed. It was Carlos. Worried, I picked up his call and the first thing he said was, Hey, you up for some stargazing? What the? Do you know what time it is? I mumbled. Come on, don't pout. I'm waiting for you right outside your place. He chirped. What are you doing outside my apartment at 2:30 in the morning? He did not reply, and through the phone, I could only hear his soft chuckle. It was a clear night, and I couldn't resist. We drove out to a quiet spot away from the city lights. Carlos had brought a couple of blankets, and we lay down on the cool grass, staring up at the sky. It's beautiful, I said, feeling a sense of peace. Yeah, it is. Carlos agreed. Makes you realize how small we are in the grand scheme of things. Grand scheme of things, huh? I looked at him smirking, and he just laughed. We talked for hours, sharing our dreams, fears, and everything in between. It was one of those nights where you feel completely connected to another person. You're a good friend, James, Carlos said softly. I'm glad I met you. I'm glad I met you too, Carlos, I replied, feeling my heart swell. A week later. These few months have brought me a lot closer to Carlos. I went from being sad and brooding all the time to happy and waking up to looking forward to the day it was all because of him. Like my morning coffee, I crave him. So, with coffee in my hand, I decided to surprise Carlos at his place. I knew he'd appreciate the gesture, and besides, I enjoyed any excuse to see him. When I arrived, I noticed his front door was slightly ajar. Thinking it was safe to enter, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was dimly lit, and only a few rays of sunlight streaming through the windows. I wondered why his apartment was covered in darkness this early in the morning. My question was soon answered, and not in the way I would have preferred, because as I walked further in, I suddenly stumbled over something hard. "Whoa!" I yelped, trying to regain my balance, but it was too late. The apartment was filled with the clatter of metal as my foot hit a bucket, and before I knew it, I was on the floor. Coffee splashed everywhere, surrounded by what felt like a lake of paint. "James?" Carlos called from another room, concern in his voice. He came rushing and lightened up the room. I looked down at myself, covered in a rainbow of paint splotches. Yeah, it's me," I called back, feeling incredibly foolish. Carlos's eyes widened at the scene in front of him. He stared at me for a whole second before bursting into laughter. "You really know how to ruin my things, don't you?" he said, shaking his head in amusement. "Look, I'm really sorry about the mess," I muttered, thoroughly embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." I tried to stand, but my hands and knees were slick with paint. Carlos cut me off with a grin. "Don't worry about it, it's just paint. But you know," he added as he helped me to my feet, "you still owe me for hitting my car." I felt my face heat up. "I'll pay for the damages, Carlos, I promise." Carlos's expression changed to somewhat mischievous as he shook his head. "That's not what I meant, James." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He chuckled, wiping a smear of paint from my cheek with his thumb. "There's only one way you can pay me back." "And what's that?" I asked, my heart pounding. "You can go on a date with me." I stared at him, stunned. The room seemed to grow quieter, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. Carlos wanted to go on a date with me? I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, joy, and a hint of nervousness. "Well, what do you say?" Carlos asked, his tone gentle but a bit uncertain. I felt my cheeks flush. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. A slow smile spread across my face. "Okay, I'll go on a date with you." Carlos's grin widened and he let out a small, triumphant laugh. "Great. Now, let's get you cleaned up. You look like a walking art project." 2 days later, Carlos and I had planned our date for a Friday night. He picked a nice restaurant downtown, a cozy place with dim lighting and a romantic atmosphere. As I dressed up, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was our first official date, and I wanted it to be perfect. When Carlos arrived to pick me up, he looked as handsome as ever, wearing a crisp shirt that highlighted his broad shoulders. He smiled warmly when he saw me. "You look great, James," he said. "Thanks, Carlos. You too," I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up. We drove to the restaurant, chatting easily. The restaurant was just as Carlos described, intimate and charming. We were seated at a corner table, away from the noise, giving us the privacy to talk and enjoy each other's company. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our childhoods, our dreams, and the random little things that made us laugh. Carlos was so easy to be around, and I felt myself relaxing more and more. As the evening progressed, I realized how much I was enjoying myself. Everything was perfect. The food, the ambiance, and most importantly, Carlos. We were in the middle of a discussion about our favorite movies when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and saw a name flash that made my heart skip a beat. "Sorry, Carlos," I said, frowning at the phone. "I have to take this, it's urgent." Carlos nodded, understanding. "Go ahead." I stepped outside the restaurant and answered the call. After a few minutes, as I hung the call, I couldn't process what I had heard. I just stood there for a couple minutes before I walked back into the restaurant, forcing a smile as I sat down. "Everything okay?" Carlos asked, concern etched on his face. "Yeah, it's fine." I lied, not wanting to ruin the night. "Just something I need to figure out." Carlos nodded, but I could tell he sensed something was off. The rest of the meal went well, but there was a slight shift in the atmosphere. I tried to push the conversation I just had to the back of my mind and focus on the here and now, enjoying every moment with Carlos. Later that night, after dinner, Carlos suggested we walk back to my apartment. The night air was cool and refreshing, and we strolled through the quiet streets, our shoulders occasionally brushing against each other. "Thanks for coming out tonight, James," Carlos said, smiling down at me. "I had a great time." "Me too," I said honestly. "This was perfect."
As we neared my apartment, Carlos reached out and took my hand. He lifted it to his lips and kissed the back of it gently. "Thank you for agreeing to come on a date with me," he said softly. I felt a rush of emotions, joy, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of impending loss. I bit the inside of my cheek, trying to keep my feelings in check. Carlos noticed my hesitation. "You don't have to be so nervous," he said, his voice gentle. "If you want to kiss me, just kiss me." I leaned in, but I pulled away, taking a step back. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling. Carlos looked at me, a little taken aback but concerned about me. "What is it, James?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "That call I got earlier, it was from Mark, one of my childhood friends. He's been MIA for a while, but now he's back and he's offering me a great job." Carlos's eyes brightened. "That's amazing, James. I'm happy for you." I shook my head, cutting him off. "It's in a different state, Carlos. I'd have to move away." "Oh," was all he said as his expression shifted from joy to a mix of confusion and concern. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. "This job is everything I need right now, but I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave you." Carlos took a step closer, his hands gently resting on my shoulders. "James, you have to do what's best for you. This is a big opportunity." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "But I just found you. We just started this." Carlos pulled me into a hug, his arms wrapping around me tightly. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." I buried my face in his chest, feeling his warmth. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I felt torn between two worlds. On one hand, the job was a chance to rebuild my life, to start anew. On the other hand, leaving meant losing the connection I had with Carlos. "Let's not talk about it right now," Carlos said, pulling back slightly to look at me. "Let's just enjoy this moment." I nodded, wiping away the tears. "Okay." We walked the rest of the way to my apartment in silence, our hands intertwined. When we reached the door, Carlos turned to me, his eyes searching mine as if wanting to say something, but he didn't. He just kissed my cheek, his lips warm and comforting. "Good night, James." "Good night, Carlos," I replied, watching him walk away until he disappeared around the corner. Over a week later. "You're not going to spend days moping about a tiny decision. Grab a beer," Carlos ordered. It was a quiet evening, and I was lying on the couch, trying to relax but failing miserably. My mind kept racing with thoughts about the job offer and what it would mean for me and Carlos. When Carlos came to me with a six-pack of beer in his hand and a determined look on his face. "Like it's that easy," I said, taking one from the pack. Carlos popped open his bottle and took a long sip before looking at me seriously. "Just tell me, do you want the job?" he asked. I hesitated, staring at the bottle in my hands. "Yes, but..." "No buts," Carlos interrupted firmly. "Then you're going to Bogota. End of discussion." "But..." "What did I just say about buts?" I felt a pang of sadness and whispered, "Okay." Carlos took another sip of beer, but then I noticed something that made me straighten up. "Wait a second, how do you know I was offered a job in Bogota?" Carlos paused, his beer halfway to his lips. "You told me," he said, his brow furrowing. "No, I specifically didn't tell you, hoping to hide how far I'd be going," I replied, my confusion growing. I was trying to avoid making it sound even worse than it already is. "James, I'm sure you mentioned it. How else would I know?" he said without looking at me. "I didn't," I insisted, my mind racing. "I remember thinking I needed to keep that part to myself." Carlos shook his head. "I know you told me. Maybe it slipped out during one of our conversations." I frowned, trying to recall every detail of our recent talks. "I don't think so, Carlos. I've been so careful about it." Carlos's expression softened, and he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Hey, maybe it just feels like you told me because we've been talking about it so much. Don't stress over it." I nodded, still lost in my thoughts. We sat in silence for a moment, the confusion lingering in the air. I took a sip of my beer, trying to clear my head. Despite Carlos's reassurance, I couldn't help but feel unsettled. "You've been my rock through all of this," I said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Carlos squeezed my shoulder. "You'll do great, James. The job is a huge opportunity for you, and we'll figure out a way to make things work between us." I nodded, grateful for his support but still feeling a nagging doubt in the back of my mind. I guess I just need to trust that everything will be okay. It will be, Carlos said confidently. We'll make sure of it. We spent the rest of the evening drinking beer and talking about lighter topics, trying to lift the heavy mood. Carlos's presence was comforting, and I appreciated his effort to keep my spirits up. But as the night went on, I couldn't help but replay our conversation in my head, wondering about how Carlos knew about Bogota when I was sure I hadn't told him. 3 weeks later. It had been a little over 2 weeks since I started my new job in Bogota. The city was vibrant, my colleagues were friendly, and the work was challenging in a good way. Despite all the positives, I couldn't help but miss Carlos. Every evening, I would return to my apartment, looking at his photo on my phone, longing to see him as I was today. As I turned the corner to my street, I glanced up and saw a familiar figure standing a few steps away from the building. My heart skipped a beat and I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I shook my head and walked past the man, dismissing the thought that it could actually be Carlos. James! The voice was unmistakable. I froze and turned around slowly. There he was, Carlos, smiling broadly at me. It hit me all at once. He was really here. Without thinking, I ran back and jumped into his arms, hugging him tightly. What are you doing here? How are you here? I asked, pulling back to look at him, still in disbelief. Carlos laughed. I'm here for you. What do you mean? You're here? I asked, my mind racing with questions. I moved here, he said simply, his smile never fading. You moved here? What about your job? I stammered, still trying to process everything. Oh, that? I switched jobs, Carlos said with a shrug. So easily? So early? How? I asked, my voice tinged with concern. Are you not happy to see me? Carlos's expression faltered for a moment, and I immediately felt guilty. Of course I am. It's just, everything is happening so fast, I explained, feeling overwhelmed. Carlos shook his head and laughed softly. Oh, you think too much. Let me put your little brain to rest. With that, he leaned in and kissed me, a tender, reassuring kiss that melted away all my worries. We stood there on the sidewalk, lost in each other until a car honked nearby, snapping us back to reality. I pulled back, breathless and amazed. You really moved here? Yes, Carlos said, holding my hands. I brought my stuff, hoping you'd let me stay with you. I laughed, feeling a wave of relief and joy. Of course, you can stay with me. Wow, I can't believe this. Believe it, Carlos said, picking up his bag. Now, let's get inside. I'm tired from the flight and could use a shower. We headed up to my apartment and I couldn't stop smiling. As soon as we stepped inside, Carlos looked around, nodding appreciatively. Nice place. I see you've settled in well. Yeah, it's starting to feel like home, I said, still buzzing with excitement. I can't believe you're really here. I still don't know how you could possibly switch jobs so easily and quickly. Didn't you have a notice period or something? Carlos dropped his bag, ignoring my question. He simply pulled me into another hug. I missed you too much to stay away. I missed you too, I admitted, resting my head on his shoulder. I'm so happy you're here. Later that night, Carlos emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, his skin glistening from the steam. He stood in front of the mirror, drying himself off, and I couldn't help but stare. His muscular frame, the way the water droplets clung to his skin, it was also mesmerizing. I felt my ears heat up again with a weird desire. I got up and walked over to him, my heart pounding. As I reached him, I gently touched his shoulder, my fingers trailing down his back. I noticed several wound marks, some faint, others not so faint. Curiosity got the better of me, and I softly asked, How did you get so many wounds? Carlos glanced at me in the mirror and gave me a small smile. For my work. I furrowed my brow. I thought you worked in an office. I used to work in an automobile factory before that, he explained. That's where most of these are from. Oh, I said quietly, my fingers still tracing the marks on his back, moving up to his neck, tracing each scar. Carlos turned around to face me, and I couldn't believe a man this beautiful, this strong, had come all the way here for me. Our eyes locked, and I leaned in, pressing my lips against his. The kiss was tender at first, but then it deepened, filled with all the emotions I'd been holding back. I kissed his jaw, then his neck, making him groan. He pulled back slightly, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart race. "There's something I want to tell you first," he said, his voice husky. I didn't stop though, kissing his neck again. I mumbled against his skin. Carlos groaned again. "Listen to me." I looked up at him and with a coy look asked him, "Can't the talking wait?" He hesitated for a moment, and then in one swift motion, he picked me up, making me gasp in surprise. He carried me to the bed, laying me down gently. His eyes never left mine as he climbed in beside me, his hands exploring my body with a mix of tenderness and urgency. Every touch sent shivers down my spine, and I felt like I was on fire. We kissed again, and this time there was no holding back. 2 weeks later. It was a bright Tuesday morning when Carlos dropped the news. We were having breakfast together, our usual routine of rice and beans, when he looked at me with a serious expression. "I have to go out of town for a company meeting," Carlos said, his tone more formal than usual. "It might take a month or so. I won't be able to contact you during this time." I tried to hide my worry, but I couldn't help but ask, "Are you sure you won't be able to get in touch at all?" Carlos nodded. "It's a high security meeting. I'll be in a remote location where communication is limited." I gave him a quick kiss goodbye, trying to be supportive even though I was anxious about the long absence. He left that day, and for the first few weeks, I managed to keep myself busy, distracting myself with work and social activities. 2 months later. 2 months had passed, and there was still no word from Carlos. I left numerous messages, sent texts, and tried to call, but nothing. I was growing increasingly worried. The silence felt deafening, and the more time went by, the more I started to doubt everything. One day, feeling desperate, I decided to contact the company Carlos had mentioned. I hoped they might have information about his whereabouts or a way to reach him. I dialed the number and spoke with a receptionist. "Hello, I'm trying to get in touch with Carlos Rodriguez. He mentioned he'd be working with your company." The receptionist's response was curt. "I'm sorry, but there is no one by that name working here. Are you sure you have the right company?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "He told me that he was going to be working with you. Are you sure you don't have any information?" "I'm certain," she replied. "We don't have anyone by that name." I hung up, my heart racing. The reality of the situation hit me hard. Where was Carlos? Why was there no record of his employment? I was left with a growing sense of dread and uncertainty. 3 weeks later. "Who's there?" I shouted as I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a loud banging on my door. With a heavy vase in my hand, I opened my door and found Carlos standing there, looking disheveled and badly wounded with a huge blotch of blood stain on his left arm. "Carlos!" I exclaimed, pulling him inside and guiding him to the couch. "What happened? You're hurt!" Carlos winced as he sat down. I had an accident. A car came out of nowhere and I fell. I'm okay, just some bruises." "God, it doesn't look like a car accident. Seems more like you were in a deadly combat. Let me take you to the hospital," I urged, panic rising in my voice. "No, don't," Carlos said, shaking his head. "I don't want to go to the hospital. I just need you to help me clean up and patch me up." I nodded, trying to stay calm. I gathered first aid supplies and began tending to his wounds. The bleeding eventually stopped, but I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and anger. Questions were rushing in and out of my head, raising all sorts of doubts in my head. How could he have hurt himself like this? It clearly couldn't be from a car accident. What was he hiding? Once I was done, I looked at him, my concern evident. "Carlos, where have you been? You disappeared for months without a word. I even contacted the company and they said they didn't know you," I asked in a teeny voice. Face turned pale, and he looked at me with a mixture of shock and guilt. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to worry you." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. Carlos took a deep breath. "I did go on a work trip, like I told you. But when I returned, I had a huge argument with my employer. They were furious with me at something, and I quit. I was back in town looking for my previous job, so they offered me a contract position, and I took it. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to be worried about all the changes." I was stunned. "So, you weren't at the company you mentioned?" "No," Carlos admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I was with my old company. The new job didn't work out, and I had to negotiate a new contract. They must be pretty mad at me for leaving, for them to say they didn't know me." I felt a wave of relief mixed with frustration. None of it made sense. "Carlos, you should have told me the truth. I was worried sick. I thought something had happened to you." "I know."
Carlos said softly, his eyes full of remorse. I'm really sorry for keeping you in the dark. I just didn't want to add more stress to your life. I sighed, sitting down next to him. I understand that you didn't want to worry me, but communication is important. I needed to know what was going on. Carlos nodded. You're right. I should have been honest with you. I'll make it up to you. I promise. I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Let's focus on getting you better first. We can talk more about this later. Carlos reached out and took my hand. Thank you for being here for me, James. I know I messed up, but I'm really glad to be back. I squeezed his hand. I'm glad you're back too. Just promise me that next time you'll tell me everything. No more secrets. Carlos nodded. 2 days later. Where are you taking me? I asked as I was blindfolded, guided by Carlos. He had been very mysterious about where he was taking me, and soon I could tell why. As he removed the blindfolds from my eyes, I could see the corner of the beach, beautifully decorated with fairy lights, lanterns, and a cozy blanket spread out in the sand. There were baskets of delicious food and a bottle of wine chilling in an ice bucket. It was obvious that Carlos had put a lot of thought and effort into this. I just turned around and hugged him. He took a deep breath and looked into my eyes. James, there's something I need to tell you, he said softly. I felt a mix of curiosity and excitement. Maybe he was finally going to confess his feelings or even propose. What is it? I asked, leaning in closer. Carlos hesitated, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions. In the short time we've been together, you've come to mean so much to me. I've been thinking a lot about us and our future. There's something important I need to share with you. My heart raced and I couldn't wait any longer. Misinterpreting his hesitation, I quickly moved in and kissed him, pouring all my feelings into that kiss. I wanted him to know how much he meant to me, and I hoped this was the moment he'd been waiting to share with me. But as soon as our lips met, Carlos pulled back, his eyes wide with shock and fear. They were stuck somewhere behind me. James, we need to run, he shouted, panic evident in his voice. What? Why? I asked, completely bewildered. Carlos didn't answer. He grabbed my hand and started pulling me up from the blanket. I looked around, confused, and saw a group of policemen approaching us from a distance, their flashing lights cutting through the dimming light of dusk. The scene was chaotic, and my heart pounded in my chest. Carlos, what's going on? I shouted, trying to keep up with him as he dragged me away from the picnic area. He didn't explain. Instead, he kept running, pulling me along behind him. The sound of our footsteps and the crunch of the sand beneath our feet were the only things I could hear. I glanced back at the approaching officers, trying to understand what was happening. Then bang! A loud gunshot rang out, piercing the air. The sound echoed through the night, making me freeze and faint in fear. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.